At exactly 7 a.m., a man lay strapped to a gurney, stone still, eyes open. He said nothing, just a handwritten quote and the faint hiss of a needle. He called himself a patriot. Others called him the devil in uniform. But behind the cold stare was something far more dangerous. A man who believed he was right. What made him do it? How did one soldier turn into a symbol of terror? And why, after taking 168 lives, did he die with perfect calm? This isn't just the story of an execution. It's the unraveling of a quiet war, planned in shadows, delivered in fire, and finished with a single quote from a 19th century poem. Before the horror that shook a nation, there was a boy, Timothy James McVeigh, born April 23, 1968, Lockport, New York, quiet, isolated, obsessed with guns before he hit puberty. Neighbors described him as polite, but distant, always distant. He read military manuals for fun, daydreamed about battlefields, and from a young age he didn't trust authority. After high school, he enlisted in the Army. Gulf War 1991. McVeigh was a decorated veteran, sharpshooter, disciplined, focused. But when the war ended, something in him didn't come back. He felt abandoned, cheated. The military he idolized no longer felt like home, and the country he'd fought for felt different. Then came Ruby Ridge. In 1992, federal agents killed a 14-year-old boy and his mother in a standoff in Idaho. McVeigh was watching. He didn't see law enforcement. He saw tyranny. Then came Waco. April 19, 1993. 76 people dead, including dozens of children after the FBI stormed the Branch Davidian compound in Texas. McVeigh was furious. He drove to Waco, sold anti-government bumper stickers, handed out leaflets. He stood outside the burning ruins and made a decision. He would strike back. McVeigh started following militia groups, reading the Turner Diaries, a racist, anti-government novel that fantasized about overthrowing the U.S. government through violence. He didn't just read it, he memorized it. The line between soldier and radical began to blur. He convinced himself he wasn't the villain, he was the response. In his twisted worldview, America had betrayed its people, and he would deliver a warning, not with words but with fire. The date was already chosen, April 19th, exactly 2 years after Waco, exactly 2 years after he believed the government had declared war on its own citizens. That would be the day he'd answer back, with 4,800 pounds of explosives and a rider truck. The plan began with fertilizer. Timothy McVeigh and his army friend Terry Nichols weren't just preparing a message, they were building a bomb. Over months, they quietly stockpiled ammonium nitrate, racing fuel and detonators. Everything about it was calculated. They stored it in barrels, mixed it by hand, and when the time came, they loaded it all into the back of a rider rental truck. 4,800 pounds of raw power, shaped into destruction. The target, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. McVeigh believed this was the heart of what he called government overreach. It housed DEA, ATF, Social Security, military recruiters, even a daycare center. The date, April 19, 1995, the exact anniversary of the Waco siege. To McVeigh, this wasn't just revenge, it was a statement, and it would be loud. He drove the truck into the city that morning, calm, unshaken, alone. By 8:57 a.m. he had parked across the street and walked toward the building. Inside, hundreds were starting their day. Parents dropping off toddlers, clerks filing forms. Routine. 9:02 a.m. Everything changed. The truck exploded with enough force to tear a 9-story crater into the federal building. Concrete disintegrated, steel twisted like paper, cars flung into the air, glass shattered across city blocks. A deafening shockwave tore through the streets. 168 people died. 19 of them were children under the age of 6, many in the second-floor daycare center. More than 680 others were injured. 324 buildings were damaged or destroyed within a 16-block radius. It was the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. Sirens screamed, smoke clouded the skyline, rescue workers clawed through rubble with bare hands, office chairs were buried beneath collapsed ceilings, a firefighter carried out the limp body of a baby, captured in a photograph that would haunt a generation. The blast was heard more than 50 miles away, and within hours the image of the wrecked building was broadcast around the world. America was in shock. At first, many assumed the attack had come from overseas, but the truth was much closer to home. Just 90 minutes after the explosion, McVeigh was pulled over near Perry, Oklahoma. The reason? He didn't have a license plate. The state trooper who stopped him had no idea what had just occurred downtown, but when he searched the vehicle, he found a concealed firearm. McVeigh was arrested, not as a terrorist, but on a weapons charge. By sheer coincidence, the man behind the worst attack on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor was already in custody. Over the next few days, investigators worked fast. A twisted axle from the Ryder truck had landed on a nearby car, its serial number still intact. That led them to the rental location and to Timothy McVeigh. Fingerprints, hotel records, phone logs. The trail wasn't just clear, it was undeniable. America expected a foreign name, an accent, a motive from abroad. What they got was a 26-year-old white male, a Gulf War veteran, with no remorse. McVeigh didn't run. He didn't hide. And when asked why, he simply said, it had to be done. His trial began in 1997. The courtroom was silent, grim, clinical. Survivors testified, parents cried, photos of children's shoes, splintered desks, and burned files were entered as evidence. McVeigh sat motionless through it all. He didn't argue, he didn't apologize. He claimed he wasn't a murderer, just a soldier in a war against tyranny. He was convicted on 11 counts of murder and conspiracy. The sentence, death by lethal injection. He refused to fight it. No appeals, no delays. He told his attorneys, I did what I had to do, I'm not afraid. Timothy McVeigh didn't flinch when the verdict came down, because in his mind he wasn't facing punishment. He was completing a mission, and that mission wasn't over yet. 6 days before his execution, Timothy McVeigh was moved into cell 38, the final stop in his journey. The room was small, bare concrete, steel sink, steel toilet, a thin mattress pressed against one wall. There was no window, no clock, just silence and time. Unlike the Hollywood image of death row, there were no rows of cells, no echoing corridors. The death house was a separate structure, tucked just beyond the rear gate of the prison in Terre Haute. He was only yards from the execution chamber, close enough to feel it, but far enough to wait. Guards monitored him around the clock, every blink, every breath. He was held in total isolation. No conversations, no visits, just one man, surrounded by routine and concrete. His personal effects were minimal, but intentional. A dictionary, a pocket copy of the Declaration of Independence, and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, the writings of a stoic emperor who preached acceptance of fate. Staff described McVeigh as eerily calm, polite, quiet. No resistance, no outbursts, just stillness. He read constantly, wrote pages that were never released. And in the days leading to his death, there were no phone calls, no last-minute reconciliations, no contact with family. If he feared the end, he never showed it. The day before his execution began like any other, but everyone knew it wasn't. 5:30 a.m. McVeigh woke naturally. No one had to shake him. He declined a sedative. He wanted to face what was coming fully alert. 7:30 a.m. Breakfast arrived. Plain and predictable. Scrambled eggs, toast, oatmeal, milk. He ate slowly, without expression. The tray was cleared without a word. 8:30 a.m. He took a shower. Guards noted he stood still the entire time. Didn't speak, didn't ask for anything. The morning hours passed in near silence. He read quietly in his cell, eyes fixed on a single page for minutes at a time. Around 10 a.m., his attorneys visited one final time. No new motions, no appeals. The conversation was brief. McVeigh simply nodded. He had accepted the outcome long ago. 2 p.m., a final visitor arrived. Father Charles Smith, a Catholic priest who had counseled him in the past. Their talk was private, but McVeigh's beliefs were unclear. He was raised Catholic, but had since described himself as agnostic. Still, he listened. Later that evening, he made his only final request: 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. As night fell, McVeigh declined last rites, refused a television, turned away any final visitors. Instead, he lay down and, according to guards, slept deeply for several hours. While McVeigh's final day moved in silence, the world outside was anything but quiet. By sundown, crowds had gathered beyond the gates of Terre Haute Federal Correctional Complex. Some were holding signs, demanding justice, chanting McVeigh's name. Others stood with candles, mourning the system, not the man. It wasn't just a protest. It wasn't just support. It was a reckoning. For the first time in U.S. history, a closed-circuit video feed of a federal execution was arranged. Not for television, but for the families of the victims in Oklahoma City, nearly 700 miles away. They watched from a private room. This wasn't about celebration. For many, it wasn't even about closure. It was about witnessing. Security was tighter than ever. Snipers on the towers, helicopters circling, federal agents patrolling every inch of perimeter. The execution was scheduled for 7 a.m. the next morning, and now the clock wasn't just ticking in McVeigh's cell. It was ticking across the entire nation. The final day began like the last, in silence. Timothy McVeigh was woken for the last time. He stood, showered and dressed in a plain tan uniform, his face unreadable, his step steady. McVeigh said nothing as they led him across the rear gate, past the grass and into a small outbuilding, the federal execution chamber. At 6:45 a.m. he entered the sterile white room. He walked to the gurney on his own, climbed on, lay back. The IV lines had already been inserted, standard for federal executions. The procedure had begun before the room ever filled. Moments later, the witnesses arrived. 10 federal officials, members of the media, and through a private feed, the families of victims watching from Oklahoma City. Some had waited years for this moment. Some still weren't sure why they were watching at all. McVeigh was asked if he had any last words. He declined, but he did leave something behind. A handwritten note, just a quote, from the poem Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. It was the final message of a man who wanted to leave on his own terms. 7 a.m. The execution began. 3 drugs. The first brought unconsciousness. The second stilled the body. The third stopped the heart. There was no twitch, no sound, no visible distress. Timothy McVeigh died without a word. 7:14 a.m. He was pronounced dead. McVeigh's body was cremated, and his ashes scattered in a location never revealed to the public. He vanished the same way he lived in those final weeks, without expression, without noise. But the debate didn't die with him. Some felt relief. They called it justice, closure, the end of a chapter far too long. Others felt emptiness, as if the state had granted him the very thing he wanted: a stage, then silence, a controlled death in a way he had always planned. It was the first federal execution in the United States since 1963, and it didn't just mark a moment in history. It reopened wounds. Was this justice, or a carefully managed exit? Was he punished or glorified in his own mind? In the end, Timothy McVeigh left behind no remorse, no effort to explain what led him there, just a poem and a body count. He remains a symbol. To some, a face of pure destruction. To others, a warning about what unchecked hatred can become when given time, fuel, and purpose. He didn't fight the system. He didn't flee it. He simply used it to end his life with the same control he had sought when he ended others. But the real question isn't how Timothy McVeigh died. It's what his story leaves behind. Timothy McVeigh chose to die without flinching. But the real question isn't how he died. It's how we live after what he did.